Hi, did you know how Sweden went from this to this? Interested? Then listen. In 500 BC, two so-called states emerged on the territory of modern Sweden, the Sve and the Gurda. Then these two countries broke up into small independent tribes, which sometimes united into larger states, and sometimes, on the contrary, broke up into smaller countries. In Uppsala, there was a court of the gods, where all the tribes came together for sacrifices and councils. Gradually, this court of the gods began to capture more and more territory. Ingald the Wicked, who became the new ruler, decided to conquer all the smaller tribes. And so, around 700 BC, Sweden looked like this. These events coincided with the Viking Age. Vikings were fierce warriors who kept all of Europe in fear at that time. The thing is that their homeland was cold, the land was infertile, and there were a lot of people, so the Vikings began to build ships and set sail primarily for food. The Vikings raided countries such as Rus, Germany, England, France, and even reached Byzantium and the Caspian Sea. The ships the Vikings sailed on were called drakers. These vessels were used for surprise attacks on the enemy. Why were the Vikings so successful in robbing their enemies, and why were they feared? First of all, it all depended on their ships. Drakers had low sides, and therefore they could suddenly attack the enemy. Then the Vikings realized that their enemies could do nothing about the fact that they were being robbed, and they became impudent and simply founded settlements on the captured territories. For example, the capital of Ireland, Dublin, was originally founded by the Vikings. The Viking Age ended only with the advent of Christianity. After some time the old religion of the Vikings was absorbed by Christianity. In Sweden, there were wars between the old and new religions for a long time, and constant wars for power. The court of the gods in Uppsala was burned down. By the end of the 11th century, the old Viking religion had disappeared. Former Vikings who had converted to Christianity themselves began a crusade against Finland around 1150. Further action began in the 13th century, when Gregory IX gave the go-ahead for a new crusade against Rus, which was suffering from Mongol raids, under the pretext of protecting the newly baptized Finns. The Swedes then began to conquer the sparsely populated western territories of Finland. Stockholm became an important trading center on the Baltic Sea. Iron, copper, hides and butter were exported from the city, and textiles, salt, beer, wine and spices such as pepper, ginger and nutmeg were imported. Thanks to cooperation with the Hansa country, domestic and foreign trade began to develop, many new cities were founded, and the population grew. In the late 14th century, Sweden, Norway and Denmark fought for dominance on the peninsula until the three kingdoms agreed to unite into one state called the Kalmar Union. Denmark then came to dominate the union, which Sweden did not like, and it fought against Denmark. Then, in another rebellion led by Gustav I Vasa and with financial support from the Hanseatic League, Sweden defeated Denmark and gained independence. In the 17th century, Sweden reached the height of its power and, wanting to turn the Baltic Sea into its own inland lake, the Swedes landed in Estonia in 1561. Sweden then acquired a natural border with Denmark, and also took over northern Finland and parts of Norway. This is what Sweden looked like in the 17th century, at the height of its power. And so in the 17th century, Sweden lost its great ambitions and territories, but how? It all started when Sweden entered the Great Northern War to make the Baltic Sea its own inland sea. Sweden's neighbors, such as Russia, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and Denmark, made an agreement to contain the Swedish Empire. The Swedish king, Charles, decided to take each country out of the war in turn. In fact, each of these countries had territorial claims on Sweden, which prompted them to unite against the Great Sweden. The Allies began the war against Sweden in 1700, the Poles were the first to do so. They attacked the Swedish province of Livonia, attacked the city of Riga. But the Poles were unable to take the city due to poor preparation and lack of ammunition, and the Swedish troops fought heroically, as a result of which the Poles were forced to retreat. Sweden was then attacked by Denmark, but Charles quickly counterattacked and, having gathered an army of 15,000, sailed to Copenhagen. Denmark was forced to sign peace with Sweden, after which Denmark left the anti-Swedish coalition. Russia, which had just finished a war with Turkey, immediately declared war on Sweden and attacked the city of Narva with an army of 40,000. When the Swedish King Charles learned of this, he immediately gathered an army of 10,000 warriors and sailed across the Baltic Sea to help. When the Swedish King Charles learned of this, he immediately gathered an army of 10,000 warriors and sailed across the Baltic Sea to help. And when they reached Narva, they met 40,000 Russian troops. The Russian king did not think that the Swedes would attack immediately and went to Novgorod, leaving another man to command the troops. It began to rain and snow. He did not allow them to begin the attack, but then the wind began to blow towards the Russians and the Swedish king saw this and immediately attacked with his army. The Russians were surprised by the attack, especially because of the snow they could not see much, so the Swedes were able to defeat the Russians near the city of Narva. Then Charles attacked the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and inflicted a number of defeats on the Polish army, thanks to which he managed to capture even the capital of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, Warsaw, and put his subject there to govern the country. Sweden defeated its enemies. It seemed that this was it and Sweden returned to Russia, but King Peter skillfully used the break and quickly began to make more artillery and began to gather an army, and when Charles returned to finish off Russia, he met strong resistance. As a result Sweden lost Livonia, Estonia and southern Finland. That's not all. In the 18th century Sweden joined the coalition against Napoleon, but when the Allies lost, Napoleon, wanting to punish Sweden, set Russia and Denmark against Sweden. As a result Sweden lost Finland and became what we see it in the 21st century, and after that Sweden to this day has never participated in a war, maintaining neutrality. That's all for today. If you liked the video, please subscribe.